French Broad River, one of the most extraordinary rivers on planet Earth. This ancient river is the third oldest in the world, behind the Nile and the New River. Unlike other rivers in Appalachia that fall from the mountains to the valleys below, the French Broad flows freely from the eastern side of the mountains all the way to the western side at nearly a half-mile above sea level. And that's because, according to scientists, the French Broad River was here even before the mountains themselves. And perhaps this is the reason that the water flows from south to north, stretching out at over 218 miles. It's a river that the natives and then the first Spanish and European explorers used to navigate these remote mountains.
Mankind has long fought to control this river, but perhaps the most remarkable story to ever take place here is the story of the Mountain Lily. That's right, a story that's nearly been lost to time until now.
So, with that, my friends, this is the incredible, true story of the Mountain Lily. Our story begins in the remote mountains of Henderson County, North Carolina, in 1875. This was the age before the railroads had ever penetrated the vast forest, and travel was done much in the same way that it had been done for centuries, down the same trails, first blazed by the bison and then by the natives, or by the shallow waterway of the French Broad River. News traveled at a snail's pace, and transportation of goods from towns down in the valleys was even slower. This left the bustling city of Asheville stranded and marooned like an island in the middle of an ocean of wilderness. Outside of Appalachia, America's towns and cities were growing at a rapid pace, buoyed by the modern marvel of the era, glamorous steamships, which transported people, food, and goods down the mighty Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Never before had interstate commerce been so efficient. Port towns sprang up and down the rivers with booming economies, welcoming businessmen and tourists alike to their fancy saloons and hotels. Even the federal government was willingly spending enormous amounts of money in an effort to dredge and deepen these rivers, to bolster these superhighways of the day. And back in Appalachia, life moved at an entirely different pace, and mountaineers were completely bumfuzzled at how politicians down in flatland country were able to smooth talk their way into all that taxpayer money. After all, mountain folks were forced to pay taxes too, but rarely had they ever seen a single benefit for their efforts. If only hill folk could get their hands on some of that government pot of gold, maybe they too could spruce up their towns and municipalities. That's when a man named Colonel Sidney Vance Pickens got to thinking. You see, Colonel Pickens was a Confederate veteran from the war between the states, and he had seen firsthand how devastating that war had been on Henderson County. Their money was now worthless. All the banks had folded up, and mountain folks were in desperate need of a boost to their rural economy. What about our river? If we could deepen it a bit, maybe we could have one of those fancy steamships up here in the mountains too. Well now, hold on just a minute, Colonel Pickens, the folks would say. You can't put no ship on the French Broad. It won't never happen. She's way too ornery. Most of the time, she's only a foot or so deep, and sometimes she nearly dries plumb up. Even when a flood comes through, there's so many jagged rocks and boulders and tree stumps that it would tear any boat to pieces. But Colonel Pickens, no, he was undeterred. He was an educated man of his age. He had studied law before the war, and he had watched time and time again at government bills that were full of pork barrel legislation. Well, there I go. I went and said it. I'm sure most folks don't have nary a clue about the origins of that term, pork barrel legislation. While many folks correctly associate the term with politicians spending federal money in their own districts, the phrase actually goes much deeper than that. And it originates in the deep South, back during the days of slavery, when it was the custom for plantation owners to take a portion of their salt meat and pour it in a barrel as a treat. It's said that senators and members of the House of Representatives would rush to raid the United States Treasury in the same manner that those workers would run to that pork barrel. Thus, the term was born and is still in use today, even though hardly anyone knows what it really means. Because if they did, I'm willing to bet they wouldn't use it. But anyhow, Colonel Pickens promptly wrote the North Carolina senators and House members and began floating the idea of getting a slice of those federal funds and use them to clean up and deepen the French Broad River. Just think of how Asheville would benefit. It would connect it with faraway cities and open up trade and commerce. Even the Postal Service would benefit. It would be the highest steamship river in the world at nearly a half-mile above sea level. It all sounded too good to be true, but the politicians were convinced. And in 1875, the government sent out the Army Corps of Engineers armed with a $25,000 budget to deepen the French Broad River. Before long, the sounds of dynamite echoed through the hills and reverberated back day and night for months as the men removed tree trunks and stumps that had been lodged in the ancient river for centuries. They dredged all the muck and mud until they hit rocky shoals that laid underneath, and then they blasted the rock out with more dynamite. Many times, they built jetties to narrow the width of the river and places to make it deeper, but the work proved to be much more expensive than at first thought, and soon the cost skyrocketed to over $50,000. And in today's money, that's $1.5 million. But nevertheless, after 5 years, the work was finally completed, and it was believed that the river was now nearly 2 feet deep along the proposed steamship route. And obviously this would take a specially built boat, but Colonel Pickens was convinced that he could do it. He just needed the money. The savvy entrepreneur quickly formed a company named the French Broad Steamboat Line and began soliciting potential investors. Yet, those common folks who had lived their entire lives on the farms that lined that river simply shook their head at both the government and Colonel Pickens for all the time and money that they were spending on this river for some sky-pipe dream. So the colonel devised another plan, and in the spring of 1881, he hired a team of men and boys to begin posting colorful signs all over Henderson County, advertising a free, all-day picnic down at the banks of the French Broad River. All the food and whiskey you could hold, the signs read. Bring the entire family and everyone you know. Come one, come all. What? Free food and whiskey? That's right. And before long, wagon tongues had spread the news far and wide about this free picnic. And on the day of the big event, folks poured down the mountainsides in ox cars, buggies, on horseback, and on foot down to the river. Others came in flat-bottom boats. The scene was electric. All the barbecue, beer, and whiskey you could imagine, along with marching bands. All day long, the festive atmosphere endured, and once everyone had a belly full, Colonel Pickens took center stage and laid out his grand plan of how the steamship he was going to build would be called the Mountain Lilly. Folks will come from all over the world to take a ride on the world's highest steamboat river. What a glorious picture he painted as the intoxicated crowd hung on every word. And just when the moment was right, Colonel Pickens offered 160 shares of stock in the Mountain Lilly Steamboat Company for $25 each. Oh, the men stormed the stage with every dollar they could beg, borrow, or steal. Within an hour, all 160 shares were sold, and folks were begging for more. Just like that, Colonel Pickens had the financial backing to build the mighty Mountain Lilly. And what happens next would change the course of modern history.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling today. 2 volumes that'll make your heart smile. Click the link below or visit theappalachianstoryteller.com to order your copies today.
By 1881, Colonel Pickens had convinced the government to spend $1.5 million to dredge the French Broad River, and he had secured $125,000 from investors to build the first steamship in the Appalachian Mountains. The proposed route would connect the cities of Brevard and Asheville, North Carolina. Every small town and village in between was sure to turn into a port city, booming with new industry. The best boat builder in Eastern America was recruited, and throughout the spring and summer of 1881, a team of craftsmen slowly brought the Mountain Lily to life. This was the biggest spectacle to ever take place in this section, and folks would come by the hundreds each weekend and sit along the shoreline and watch the mighty Mountain Lily take shape. Oh, the boat was state-of-the-art, with propellers powered by 12 horsepower engines positioned on each side of the vessel that were guaranteed to sail in as little as 18 inches of water. With double decks, each level had a capacity of 100 people, in addition to hauling freight. Finally, after 5 years of dredging the French Broad River and building the Mountain Lilly Steamship, the moment arrived when she would be launched from her gangplanks. Folks traveled for days to witness the launching of the 90-foot ship, the biggest ship ever seen in the Appalachian Mountains. They wore their Sunday best, some with top hats, and once again brass bands were blaring. Politicians were shaking hands and holding babies, and speeches and praise were heaped on Colonel Pickens before 100 men and women, decked out in their finest attire, boarded the Mountain Lily. Moments later, a pretty girl in a white dress smashed a champagne bottle against the side of the ship and christened her before the ropes were cut and the Mountain Lily slid down the banks and made her first splash into the French Broad River. A steam whistle sounded over and over to celebrate the moment as startled animals in the forest ran for their lives. Colonel Pickens had done it. Well, for a moment at least. You see, just a few moments later, the ship became stuck on a rock, and a team of mules pulling ropes had to pull her out of harm's way. And then she bottomed out. This time, a score of men on each side of the riverbank pulled with all their might, as mules did the same in the water, inching the boat along. And after 12 hours of pulling, the boat had barely gone a mile, and none of it without the brute force of ropes pulling it. Finally, the folks had had enough, and the finely dressed passengers abandoned their maroon ship and went home. There the Mountain Lily would sit until the first big storm came through and swelled the river and tossed her like a rag doll before leaving her abandoned further down the river in a pile of logs. There she remained for years. Slowly, folks began salvaging the wood from the boat, and they built a church nearby named the Horseshoe Baptist Church. Even the Mountain Lily's bell was salvaged and has been used as the church's bell ever since.
That's right, the Mountain Lily was doomed from the very start. In fact, even if she would have sailed that day, it was later realized that just 2 miles down the river, she would have smashed into and destroyed a bridge, since no one had even thought to raise it. So there you go, my friends, the true story about the most spectacular steamboat to ever set sail in Appalachia, the Mountain Lily. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.